Call the May 20th, 2022 meeting of the Exeter Housing Authority to order. We barely have a quorum. Jim Jameson is joining us via internet. So we have 4 members. 7 member board. And hopefully others will show up here shortly, but we are going to see. Going to need to review the agenda. I would entertain a motion to or the agenda. I'll make that motion. A motion, a second.
I'll second.
A motion second. All those in favor, raise your hand, please. Motion passes with 3 absences. It is my pleasure today to thank Mary Ann for her 22 years of service to this organization. Scott had some overwhelming numbers of what she has accomplished during her tenure for Contested Housing Authority and the Loveland Housing Authority prior to that. And Mary Ann is moving on at the end of this month and is retiring. And we wanted to quickly recognize her contributions to this organization over the years. And Mary Ann, I have this for you, and along with a card that's being circulated for signature. And we hope that this will last you into retirement.
I don't know. I don't do good with plans.
Oh, that will serve you.
You got it. See, Jess, it's like this.
And should you choose, do not have to remain for the balance of the meeting. But we wanted to recognize you publicly at this board meeting to thank you for all that you've done for this organization over the years. If you would like to say a few words, you certainly may do that.
It's been a privilege to serve both housing authorities and the people that have had an impact on me. And I hope that I, in a small way, had an impact on them. And housing is so important and it's so difficult. So when we can house people that really need it, it gives me great joy. So, and I appreciate everybody that's been on my side, been in my corner, listened to me cry, and my successes. It's been very nice, and I really do appreciate everybody that I've worked with. Thank you.
Thank you again for your service.
Sure.
Is there any public comment?
Good morning. My name is Annika Hoagland, and I'm a Vista Ridge homeowner. I appreciate that the Vista Ridge deed restriction is on today's agenda as a discussion and reporting item. My hope is that this discussion about the maximum sales price and valuation methodology will be anchored in the text of the deed, which I've provided for you. Director Moulton recently wrote that housing is technical, emotional, financial, political, and deeply personal, and that complexity is a reason to communicate more clearly and more often. I agree. He also wrote that these conversations require transparency and that fair questions should be a part of the process. That is the spirit in which I am commenting today. Because the materials and presentation were not included in the posted board packet, I have not seen them. I do not want to respond prematurely, but I'm concerned by the April meeting minutes, which states that discussion around the potential changes centered on, quote, reevaluating the initial base valuation and recalculating the base every 5 years. I do not see language in the recorded deed restriction that supports recalculating the base value every 5 years. As I read the deed restriction, the relevant comparison is market value at purchase and market value at resale, with appreciation determined by a market value appraisal from a qualified appraiser. A 5-year recalculated base value appears to move the formula away from market value appreciation toward administratively regulated appreciation. Vista Ridge already contains 2 affordability protections. 1, the buyer eligible requirement, and 2, the resale formula. If the formula produces a maximum sales price that is above what an eligible buyer can afford, the seller must negotiate within the eligible buyer market. The April minutes also reference lending market requirements. If those requirements matter, then the valuation method should be clear and predictable for homeowners, buyers, and lenders. A base value that can be administratively recalculated every 5 years seems to create more uncertainty, not less. I'm not asking the board to resolve the full interpretation today, but I am asking for governance oversight. Specifically, I ask the board to make sure that any proposed methodology clearly identifies 1, the deed language supporting that methodology, 2, whether EPHA believes the recorded deed restriction already authorizes the method, or whether additional authority would be required, such as homeowner consent or deed amendments. And 3, how affected homeowners will be able to review and respond for any final direction or application. Affordable home ownership should create a doorway, not a dead end. Vista Ridge homeowners accepted a shared equity structure. We're not asking for unrestricted market gains. We're asking for the deed restriction to be interpreted in a way that preserves affordability for the next buyer, while also allowing the current homeowner to move forward when life changes. My family and I have lived with uncertainty for more than a year. If housing is a part of community stability, then the process for resolving this issue should also be stable, clear, and transparent. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comments? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Brenda Lovell, and I'm a homeowner at Vista Ridge. I want to say that I understand EPHA's responsibility to maintain affordable housing over time. I read the rent increase materials in the board packet. I noticed that EPHA is asking the board to recognize that increased cost, inflation, maintenance, and changing economic conditions affect its ability to operate responsibly. I think that is reasonable. Costs do change, and housing programs have to be able to respond to economic reality. But that is also why the Vista Ridge deed restrictions matter so much to homeowners. We are facing the same changed economic reality. The cost to move, buy, rent, finance, insure, and maintain housing has increased dramatically since many of us have purchased our homes. So I'm asking EPHA to apply the same principle to Vista Ridge homeowners. When the deed restriction says appreciation in market value, I believe that should mean market value at the time of purchase compared with market value at the time of resale. That is what would allow homeowners to receive the portion of appreciation the deed restriction already allows, while still preserving affordability through the eligible buyer requirement and the shared appreciation formula. I'm not asking EPHA to abandon affordability. I'm asking EPHA to recognize that affordability has 2 sides. It needs to be affordable for the next buyer to enter, but also needs to be possible for the current homeowner to move forward when life circumstances change. If EPHA can acknowledge that increased costs require adjustment for its own housing operations, I ask the board also to acknowledge that increased costs affect Vista Ridge homeowners. Please make sure any proposed valuation method reflects the market value language in the deed restriction, rather than creating an administrative value that leaves homeowners unable to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Elaine Hunt Downey and I live at 874 Crabapple Lane in Vista Ridge. I bought my unit new in 2004 and have lived there for almost 22 years. I was grateful, and I still am, that an affordable home ownership program exists in Estes Park, and I support the continuance of that program. I have two comments. I want to publicly thank Annika for attending every meeting on behalf of the affordable Vista Ridge homeowners. She represents all of us, not just hers, and we stand with her on the request she has brought to the Housing Authority and the board. Secondly, as the Housing Authority and board discuss options on Vista Ridge, I would urge you to remember that the homeowners understand market value to be at market value. This is the main issue that we have brought to the Housing Authority. I pay HOA dues the same as my market unit neighbor. I have made upgrades to my home. I pay insurance on my home to replace it at full value, not a calculated value. For most of the 22 years, I have paid market value taxes. Larimer County assesses it at market value. I urge you to remember that the affordable homeowners are more than a calculation. They are real people with real lives. I request that the homeowners be included in the resolution process and have an opportunity to review and understand any proposed changes before finance.
Thank you very much. And your name, please?
Elaine Hunt.
Thank you, Elaine. I appreciate that. Yes, ma'am.
And I still speak. Public comment?
Yes. Public comment?
Christine Poppins. Just a question. Is this being recorded on Zoom?
Not on Zoom, but it is being recorded, yes.
But it's also live?
No, it is not live.
Okay. What is the chance of the meetings I've requested before?
That takes a level of technical proficiency that we're not prepared to do in real time without support staff. So
Okay.
we will post recordings, but at this point, I don't have a timeline for having these streamed live
Okay,
because that requires additional resources that we simply don't have.
okay. And I went looking for the previous meeting that I know was recorded. Where are they?
They're on our YouTube page,
On YouTube.
which is
Okay.
also linked on our main website as well.
I'll go looking again. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other public? I would like to take this opportunity to welcome our new liaison from town.
Thank you.
Trustee Lancaster. And you have a significant housing. Given your prior role in the community, and welcome you to liaison position here. Look forward to your input.
Thank you. I'm excited to be back.
Thank you very much for me. Okay, minute approval. There were, I saw, if I could find them here, typos.
There's a date change under I. And the represent change.
Stacy, where's that?
Under action item 1.
Okay.
Oh, on the agenda, that's fine.
Any other changes, additions, or questions? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as corrected.
I'll make that.
Motion, do I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes 3 absent. Okay, keep right along. Financial discussions. One. Rent and income.
I will brief as the memo, laid out the recommendation of an increase of 3%, which falls in line with what I communicated really, well, at least last year plus, that I believe we would be in a place of stabilization after unprecedented inflation, in late 23, 24. While the inflation environment did tame, there's now upward pressure on that inflation, but it's not yet predominant enough to move off of the 3% increase. So that is our recommendation today.
Your package did contain historical information as well. This has arisen in the community. One necessarily, not necessarily really with rent increase, but I love it.
We have that.
Figuring it out.
I haven't run that stat recently. It's really easy to run. Actually, 632. Yes, so close. So roughly 632.
I'll come back to
Okay.
those numbers, just so you know, it'll be a long pause.
Also, we have to realize that when we increase the rent by a percentage, that's a compounding. So in the past couple of years, we've got a 5% twice. And we can now go up to 3%. All that is compounded one on the other. We're not just stepping it up a dollar, stepping it up a percentage. So keep that in mind. I also have a question of, well, I have not yet seen the AMI from state. Do we have, sure.
Yeah, that kicks off this process. So it was delayed this year due to the governmental shutdown. So AMIs and associated rent maximums went up by 2.1%.
Do we know how close our residents in the Estes Park area fall within that AMI for Larimer County? Concern is that the AMI, the area median income for Larimer County, is higher than the AMI for our residents in Estes Park. In other words, our salaries are not the same as what they are in Loveland and Fort Collins. And so the other areas. That's a curiosity question, but I think it's a question that we need to reflect on, particularly as we move into increasing rents and increasing expenditure. Something we perhaps continue with.
Would you like me to provide some commentary on that?
Yes.
So when wage data, when you get as granular as that question implies, can be a bit unreliable and a little bit difficult to obtain. We, I think, historically have estimated that there's evidence to suggest it's maybe 10 to 15% less. But again, that's a difficult number to grab onto. We have an opportunity to ask some experts who do this data crunching in our engagement with Root Policy regarding the housing action plan. So I can inquire with them what their thoughts are on the granularity. I included again the 2024 memo with that historical perspective primer, which I believe discusses the actions that took in 2020.
Good.
And it's important to note that page 25 in your package highlights and gets to exactly what you're referencing, Eric, which is we are substantially below the maximums, and that is intentional to help account for that delta between the area median income level at the county level versus the localized AMI level. So if you look at that page 25 in your packet, we are blended across the board with somewhere around 18% than the county level AMI from a rent maximum perspective. So I think we do a good job of capturing that difference.
I think that's important distinction to make, particularly as the area median income chart becomes available. And not only our families know it, but also where that they're not maximizing, absolutely top of the line. Thank you. And I look forward to seeing the AMI chart. So I would entertain a motion at this point to increase this floor to an average of 3% for next 12-month period of time. That would begin. Stacy just stepped out. I'll revisit that. Revisit that. Not to conduct any business without a quorum. So we can wait until Stacy. Okay. Now I would entertain a motion to increase rents for one, is that correct? August 1, and that's an annual maintenance. So August 1st, 2026 through July 31st, 2027. Motion? I'll second. Any further discussion? Jim, any discussion here? No. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion passes with 3 absences.
We were able to run the stats report for our tenants, and I underestimated based on historical averages. So the actual number that we are housing as of today is 669.
Which reminds me, let's all put our phones on.
What was that number again? 669 as of today, this morning. And that, there's a little bit more detail to that I think is pertinent. That represents 3, something like that. 92 households have children. We house 166 children. That represents roughly 17% of our school-age children that are enrolled.
I think those are important numbers. Okay, discussion items. 2026 financial stats snapshot. Advising that we are into quarter two, halfway through quarter two. And just for the general public, we are always 45 days behind because of the distribution of tax dollars that come down from the state, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 45 days after they were collected. So that's why we're just now discussing.
And substantively, it's less about the tax collections on 6C on this financial report. It's more the financial closing of our books in April, the timing of April's meeting, that it's not always feasible to turn around the quarterly report. So hopefully you'll have an opportunity to review the snapshot I provided along with commentary. Generally speaking, the items of note, most properties are performing as expected and close approximately in line with budget. Forgive me if I stumbled over words this morning. I was in the office very late last night and back just after 5 this morning, so I'm running on some fumes. There are a few highlighted concerns in the notes, primarily around expense categories of windows, blinds, screens for windows, flooring, and painting. All types of vacancies. Vacancy loss at a couple of the properties is more than our Q1 budget as well. At a couple of properties in a substantial way. So the operations team and I are meeting Wednesday afternoon to go over some of the financial highlights from this report. So make sure that the year position we need to be it. So most of the flooring issues, over budget issues, resulted in us upgrading the luxury vinyl plank, which has a 20 to 30-year lifespan as opposed to carpet, that's at 7 years. So while it is an expensive upgrade and we try to do a few units a year, we sort of missed the boat in the first quarter and upgraded a couple units that we probably should maintain carpet in. But I still have confidence that we'll be able to hit our NOI numbers by the end of the year. Any questions?
Any additional comments or questions? $60 cash flow statement.
Just a couple quick notes on 6C. Again, beginning of the year collections are to be taken with a grain of salt, in my humble opinion, as the heavy collection months are still a ways away from us. So we are coming in quite far ahead of anticipated collections. But again, it doesn't take much of a June, July, August, September month to knock that gain up real quick. So we are ahead of pace. That number for collections through May, which is the collection month of March, are accurate to the actual collections. I think that's my only commentary. Oh, no, sorry, one more. I knew there was something else. You will notice only a couple times in our history since 6C, item W way down kind of toward the bottom, where it says reconciling AP reimbursements. We made some substantial changes to the accounting structure for 6E to build in a little bit of transparency. And in my review of Q1 financials, and reconciling the bank account with core 6E, which I still do. Accounting does their bit, but I reconcile it completely myself as well. There were some items that are being expensed to 6E directly that should not be. One of those has already been reimbursed to the tune of about 26,000. And I think there's gonna be a few other corrections, so that's why those items 44,717 and 26,500 are down at the bottom. Substantially, most of those I think will come away and be reimbursed, because those should come out of the base funding amount that is transferred out on basis. The most notable one is, in the first 2 years, we directly expensed the 2 FTEs that are attributed to 60 directly. And at the beginning of this year, we now expense everything for those 2 FTEs, salary, benefits, general overhead, to the umbrella organization, which is EPHA, and then we provide base funding to cover those from 60.
For audience, FTE is full-time equivalents and it's referred to an employee. Any further questions? Scott? Hearing none, we'll move on to the discussion on Mr. Rich. I think you packet that has just. What, you want to do it? I like it.
Certainly. So, as you know, we've been discussing the Vistage deed restriction for some time. And I have put in a substantial amount of work, and that work included, at the tail end of this memo, something a little bit new, and it provides a breakdown of sort of the sources of information that we gathered in conversations, at least with most of the entities I think I spoke with, who have experience in this arena as we do. And a lot of them have similar aged restrictions or older. So they have experience in sort of dealing with these legacy style deed restrictions that perhaps have lost their efficacy through a few different aspects over the course of their 20, 30, or in some cases 40-year time span existed. I did that simply to highlight that we don't do anything in a vacuum. We're professionals. We reach out to other professionals in the industry to learn from their experience and expertise. At the beginning of this, I was hopeful that there would be a solution that would help mitigate, I don't know if mitigate is the right word, find a bit better balance between the existing deed restriction, its application in the appraisal world, and how it is slowly lost a little bit of touch with general market appreciation, while of course maintaining affordability. I was hopeful that we'd be able to do that in an administrative way that wouldn't require the more in-depth, both legal and other reviews, that would require essentially recording a new deed restriction after obtaining voluntary approval to do that from every single existing Vistage owner. After having quite a bit of conversations, putting in a lot of research, I don't realistically see a path forward to remedy this slight difference without reworking the deed restriction and going to each subsequent owner with the proposed change. Obviously, there'll be a lot of education in that, and moving to the new sort of best in class or at least better in class deed restriction. It's important to highlight in this memo, and I apologize that I couldn't make it in the packet before. But again, today's item is a discussion item. I'm still going to cover some high level points. What I would like from this board is to take this, review it between now and our June 9th meeting, where we can have maybe a more well-rounded conversation about it. Understanding that I put you all a little bit on the spot today, but not frequently provided with the rest of that. The Vistage deed restriction has performed well. It has done its primary goal, which is to preserve affordability. It has done that, and it's done it successfully. If we look back at sales data, and I have done two data pulls on this, once in 2022 and once in 25, historically, of all sales transactions across all district units, they have averaged an annual appreciation of 1.55%. The market, generally speaking, looking at Colorado from a state level, has realized roughly 3.6% increase from 2010 through 2026. Obviously, with ups and downs in that type. Substantially similar deed restrictions across the state cover a gamut of similar calculations and methods with similar metrics, meaning some of the deed restrictions and most of them, and Aspen is an example, they just reworked some of theirs to an annual cap at least of 3%, which still feels a little bit rich for me to maintain affordability. And try to split the balance between affordability and maintaining compliance with the income thresholds. I actually laughed out loud at myself last night when I was putting this together, finalizing it. Where I landed on this is I think my recommendation is going to be a deed restriction that uses AMI, that change year over year, as the metric. So not CPI, although the AMI calculations are closely tied to CPI. And that would have the impact of creating a more transparent appreciation model while keeping and maintaining affordability, because it would be tied to the localized Hanover County AMI chart. That chart from 2010 through this year's increase has an annualized increase of 2.5%. Travis, that only went back to 2010, at least also published online. That only gives us a little bit of a gap to this ridge, so it's pretty close as a comparison. So if you were to compare the current 1.55 performance of the existing deed restriction to that 2.5 metric, that gap doesn't sound a lot, but compounded over a period of ownership or the 23 years, just about the units that existed, that can be somewhat material, probably to the tune of $10,000 to $30,000, depending on the unit, and sales transactions there as well. So I think there are two paths realistically. There's three as presented in this memo, which is one, do nothing, and we are comfortable with the way it's been performing. The 1.55 seems reasonable from an appreciation standpoint while maintaining affordability. The two is essentially an administrative transparency move that can be done sometime in the next few months, which doesn't substantially change anything, because I don't think we can change anything and not be in violation of the existing deed restriction. But there are some things outlined in this memo that could bring some additional clarity and transparency to the transactions for subsequent buyers or sellers in the meantime. I think my real recommendation is option 3, which is to work on a sort of best-in-class revision to this deed restriction that would substantially use the AMI, change in AMI on an annual basis as the basis for whatever the appreciation mechanism is. And the addition to that is that there would be a cap placed on. So we wouldn't, I don't think it'd be wise to directly mirror the annual increase every year. But then we would place a cap on it of say 3%. So in case that we had a few times in the early 2020s where that AMI chart went up 8, 9, 11% in 1 year, then we would cap it somewhere, say 3% as an example. And that would again help maintain affordability because it's tied directly to the qualifying income, meaning that when we calculate the maximum sales price, we would by default be under the average income increase meaning the max sales price would in theory be affordable. And then will then make it fair to a household making less than 80% AMI. Which qualify for this. So I'll stop, see if there are any questions. Again, noting that I put you guys on the spot.
Yeah, this needs considerable study. Making recommendations, we can roll with this. Where does non-serviceable second fall? It's for general information. The Victory Ridge homeownership program has with it from the housing authority a non-serviceable $50,000 note. It's not paid on, but goes towards purchase of your. Where stand with that particular factor of dealing with these?
So
Are we going to offer that? Appreciate?
yes. That money is stayed behind and will remain behind and rolls over to each subsequent. And the way that mechanism works is the 50,000, there are 3 or 4 houses that it's 56.5, rolls over to subsequent buyer. And that reduces the amount that a qualified buyer or qualified household has to qualify for them. So for simplicity's sake, the sale price is 250,000. Take away the soft second of 50, they only have to qualify for 200.
Okay, 50 keep rolling over, right?
So can you model it for me? Like, I'm just sorry, I'm tired too. 2:00. Can you just give me an example of what that looks like for, say, a homeowner who's had their home for 5 years? How
Has-
that works out?
It has no impact in that scenario. It's really just
So
the
are we-
initial.
So are we changed, like, the market value, the way that we appraise it, is that staying the same?
So in this, we would be changing that model. So currently the model is as written in the leadership. And this, to the public comment, this is part of the problem which I outlined here. There's ambiguity in that process. Because the original deed restriction from the early 2000s, in my opinion, did not adequately define what market rate meant. Newer deed restrictions are very clear what that means. To avoid that gray area ambiguity in that definition. So currently, market rate auto restricted home, particularly in this style of deed restriction, has a definition in the appraisal world, and they have to take all encumbrances into consideration. Meaning, and we have heard this in public comment before, is the risk there, and what ends up happening is there is a type of double counting for the restrictions that are in place. Because if the appraisers are following their professional guidelines, which they do it outside of us, we have nothing to do with the appraised value. They follow their own professional guidelines and appraise the property as they're supposed to. Then they're taking that limited buyer pool and income restriction into consideration. And then we apply the 50% rule on top of that, which can have an impact of reducing the maximum sales price more than it probably should be. And that's where we see that little bit of the delta in recent sales. Jeff, I don't know if you know off the top of your head what the last couple sales were roughly.
The maximum price,
Yeah.
anywhere between 270 and 295.
And, I looked at it again, and part of affordability here, this is where my commentary. Just a metric, so I'm not sure if that sales price. It significantly is impacted by financial markets. And so right now where we sit, it's crept up, particularly this morning, is that that's stripping away affordability, and someone at 80% AMI, even on the new chart, can only afford a home roughly around $300,000 to $310,000 and not exceed that typical cap of 30% of their gross income going to housing costs. So most lenders will now push that to 35 or 38. Some will go to 42. I think that's a horrible practice, personally. But the recent values show that there is a little bit of a delta there, where we're not allowing current buyers to kind of go or push the envelope, so to speak, of affordability against what someone at that maximum income could afford. Does that all make sense?
Scott, could I add?
Please.
So, along with everything that Scott said, within the deed restriction, it currently states that the new or the buyer cannot exceed 40% of their gross annual income on housing costs. And so that's where some of it also falls in line, where some lenders won't even get close to that 40 mark. They want to be around 33. And so that adds another layer of complication, and where closing dates have typically been within 30 days. Some of the Vista Ridge sales in the recent years have pushed off to 45 to 60 days in order for the lending structure to change a little bit. So it doesn't get close to that 40% of gross annual income mark.
And then the maximum price, I think, is a key component, and that the structure of any new proposal that I bring to this board to consider. I believe one of the means of that should come a little bit closer. Again, it hasn't performed, but a little bit closer to what that maximum affordability could be, understanding that the market, particularly lending market, takes care of a large piece of it. But again, term max price means something there. Then any potential buyer would have that document from us, essentially a letter certificate saying this is the maximum price that you can put your home on the market. But it is still up to that seller to put the home on the market for whatever price they deem appropriate, as long as it's under the maximum sales price. So they could max that out, attempt to go to market the max price, and then if it sits longer, 6 months, a year, and it doesn't sell, the mechanism they have available is just wait or drop your price until you find a qualified buyer that's willing to offer and qualifies and close on the loan. So that provision of trying to get as close to that max as possible is a tough place to get on a deed restriction that needs to live kind of in perpetuity to some degree. But it's with the intent of allowing the subsequent buyers, one, we maintain the affordability, but allowing them to reap as much of that appreciation as is possible, with the key restriction being 80% or less.
Any other questions for Scott? And this is for you. It's homework. For everybody looking at it very closely. So back, try to work this process. This is how we can define it. How we can make this work and benefit our homeowners. I'm sorry, not to other comment. The board has not had an opportunity to we understand your position. You've made that very clear over the last 6 or 7 months. So figure out how we can deal with the situation for our homeowners. It's particularly volatile period of time in the real estate market. The last 7 or 8 years. Anything else, Scott, on this particular item today? We will be visiting this again. moving on, that's the Park Development Code rewrite. Okay, Pete.
Okay, so, this is later than we wanted it to be. And that falls on me. He and I separately have done a pretty thorough read of the 30% draft of the development code. And I think 2 months ago, I mentioned to this board my intent was to complete that review. I think at the time we have the 30%. But to review and provide our feedback to community development in the town staff based on the lens that we do the development through primarily, and that is to provide additional affordable, attainable housing options to our community. It is a numbing exercise to go through. I don't want to put words in Pete's mouth, but it's a bit of a numbing exercise to go through this and read it. So I've created 2 documents that again were just presented to you this morning. So you could have not had an opportunity to review them. One is a letter addressed to the town and town staff, sort of providing a summary of our view, highlights a few points that we want to make. And then it is backed up by a memo, which is a little bit more of a technical look with our recommendations, for the changes based on the 30% development of radar. I will say that substantially there were some positive changes in the development code. There were also some that, in my very humble professional opinion, simply do not work in the real world and would have the result of mitigating who can create housing and what housing they need.
If you will recall, for those of us who were around, the last time the development code was updated, one of its objectives was to reduce the amount of housing that could be built in the Essex area. It didn't. For us, to provide an opportunity to deal with those people who needed housing or are the workforce. I mean, that's hard. It seems to me that the development rewrite here currently dealing with is attempting to do the same thing again. In terms of limited network units, built where they can be built, who can build them, and effects of various components for development, housing, significantly. So I encourage you again, do your homework. Look at these, the letter, look at also the comments that have been made. See what additional comments, questions, those raised from you.
Pete and I have time on our calendars this afternoon because we've collaborated on a few items as we've both been reviewing it separately. And Pete has provided me with all of his written commentary, which is incorporated in this. I think there's only 1 or 2 items that didn't make it in this, but purposefully on my part. We are meeting this afternoon to discuss this in more detail to confirm and see if there's any changes that we still want to make as staff to this, but I think substantively I've captured, I believe, most of what both of us found, where we think tweaks need to be made. I did prioritize our recommendations, I think a high, medium, low sort of category and grid at the bottom, at the tail end of this memo. I do want to call out 2 significant things, and there are more than 2, but the 2 that I think are sort of most detrimental, and maybe 3. There were 2 changes made to the 30% that would have a chilling effect on housing, period, and just simply don't work in the real world. And that is the addition of the reduction of AMI levels for attainable or affordable from the existing 150 down to 80. That 80% definition is still the definition of low income and is the blended AMI average for LIHTC deals, which that hints at a very specific category of housing need, which is the low end of the spectrum. And it would strip away any flexibility that any developer could have in providing housing options across the spectrum. It would have a chilling effect in my mind.
But, and what we have done as an entity, in conjunction with other entities such as the town, what we have done is we have addressed quote unquote workforce housing to deal specifically with our workforce. If you will recall, when we built the 26 units out of Peakview, that was strictly workforce housing. But that is defined as someone working 30% or 30 hours or more, living in those units, working within the Estes Park School District boundary. That is the significant need that's been identified by at least the last two major housing studies. Provide workforce housing for those people. And typically those are at the max of the 150% of AMI as attainable. But if the development code takes us back to the point of saying it's the AMI needs to be reduced to 80%, that takes us out of the workforce housing business. That eliminates probably the majority of anything that can happen at fish hatchery. It limits anything that we can build for other individuals who work within the boundaries. It force us out. Now, force us to people. How do you try to deal with properties outside of the town? When what we're really looking for is more of the type of properties that we can get, so people can walk to work, so down and out, so that they can have it all. Thoughts on that, Josh?
Yeah, just a couple quick comments. And that was good commentary. I think we're in a unique position when we have real world examples of why flexibility matters when it comes to housing. Housing at the end of the day is about families and housing people. Sticks and bricks matter, but it is about families that live in that housing. And we all know that life is not clean, it is not simple. Families do not fit in cute little boxes, not metaphor. I'm talking metaphorical boxes, actual boxes. And being overly strict or stringent in a development code level around those requirements strips away that flexibility, and it strips away who we can serve and how we can serve them. Fall River Village is a great example. The development code now does not, and this is item number 2, that is now in 30%, that in my humble opinion, should be stripped. The current development code defines a working individual or working household as one occupant 18 years of age or older, works within the school district boundaries. Full stop, period. The 30-hour method has been administratively applied by the town to all, except for 2 recorded LURAs or land use restriction agreements. They have added in the 30-hour that is restricted by its nature, meaning we effectively can only house full-time folks. If you understand the employment base and workforce base of this community, it is largely based on also part-time or seasonal working folks who are part of the workforce, but may not meet the 30-hour threshold on an annualized basis. We have had to deny workforce housing on that metric at peak, as an example, for Grand Estates, because they don't meet that threshold. We come at 28 hours, 26 hours, but they don't meet the threshold, so we can't help them there. That was added in to 30%. My request here, recommendations that take that out. Fall River Village is a great example. We do not have that restriction. The vast majority needs that restriction, but we have a handful of folks that are in that 26 to 30-hour range, working in that part-time realm. Or they have two working members of the household that both fall in that range, but if the 30-hour requirement is on it, they wouldn't meet the definition. But as a household, in my mind, they do meet the working definition. They are part of the localized workforce. But if we get overly strict at the development code level, it strips away the ability of an organization like ours to actually house people that are part of the workforce. Not only the hour requirement, but the income requirement matters. So the lower portion of Fall River Village, and this is to highlight why 80% is the wrong direction. It, in my recommendation, it should either stay that where it is now, 150% or below. I recommend a tiered structure with clear definitions. And I think I also added in a comment that in reality, and I made this comment a few years ago, on the ownership side, you should possibly consider moving that threshold to 175, because we're almost at that point where the market has outstripped incomes far enough. And at some markets, similar to ours, they push that to 200 already. Fall River Village Lower has a blended income averaging requirement, meaning the 65 lower units, we cannot exceed an average AMI that we're serving at 90%. Stay below that. But that gives us the flexibility to serve households that don't fit into that clean bucket of 90% or less. We currently house 11 households that are over that 90% threshold. We have a blended average AMI of 62%. We just added this.
Median was 62, B was like 66.
68. So the average AMI is 68. The median AMI, as it exists in real terms, is 62%. So that highlights the flexibility of not hard coding on development code at 80%. I wouldn't, now it would be different for Fall River Village because it wasn't in development. We didn't need it for bonus density, and that's what that definition was all about. However, if that was a new development, it would have required a bonus density, meaning if there was an 80% apply to it, we wouldn't be able to even match state standards of affordability to provide a solution that works for our community, and we wouldn't be able to serve a broad spectrum of folks. We would just be narrowing in on this assumed definition of what the workforce is. So I could talk more about it, but that's why I don't believe lowering those income caps or added 30 hours works. And those are two things in here that significantly went the incorrect direction.
Sure. Do you know why they did that? When you dropped it?
I do not. I think I can pontificate a little bit here in that I know town board for a while has given some direction throughout this part of the strategic planning process. And I think in some of the sessions for development that rewrite that have said two things primarily. Can we more clearly define what affordable is in the development code? And can we structure it in a way that incentivizes housing that we need? I think part of the concern that community members and then vis-a-vis trustees have communicated is that attainable and bonus density tied to the attainable provision at 150% didn't deliver the housing that we need. From a housing professional, my stance is that no, there is no perfect solution. But if we don't provide a spectrum of housing options, we serve no one, and intent, while well-meaning, won't result in substantive housing development to serve the community. That flexibility in spectrum is what we need to be able to have options to house those. So how and why they landed on 80% and putting that in the dev code, I don't know, but I'm sure it's tied to those conversations.
Really quickly, this was an item that was directed to town staff in the strategic plan to discuss housing definitions, specifically around affordability for the workforce. There's a study session that's scheduled for July 14th that the town staff have worked alongside the housing authority on presenting some different options that will touch on this. And will hopefully, depending on the direction from the board from that study session, be incorporated in the next draft. The next draft of the development code, the 50%, right? 50%, is the following meeting on July 28th. So there's going to be a couple opportunities to discuss that. I don't know why 80% has been put in to this version at this point, knowing that this was going to be a discussion presented to the trustees.
I don't know that any discussions.
I think it was based just on feedback directly to the consultants. And so, I don't, yeah.
Yeah, in rewatching some of the public hearings on it, we did, because it shocked me when I saw it. So did the 30 hours. I did not pick out in any of the recorded meetings that was a direction given. So it could just been the consultants, reading tea leaves and throwing it in there based on those. So it's quality.
I don't remember that. Just because I don't remember, it doesn't mean.
Right.
Yeah.
But I was in the similar places.
But I don't remember any discussions like that. The other one that I was concerned about, is that we haven't talked a lot about, this community is seasonal housing. And the seasonal would be even more aggravating for them, certainly the 30 hours, because a lot of them have work. Yeah.
A lot of people seasonally work longer hours and then they are back.
And
And
in the winter time,
in
they're
the
off,
winter
yeah.
time, they don't get the hours, they're not available. So you're forced to out of housing because you got 40 hours all summer, but that's only 4
Or
months.
90 hours also.
Yeah. Or you get 3 jobs.
And that's a really important point. We take that into consideration both in income qualifying and hour qualifications. But that seasonal adjustment can sometimes be enough, depending on the role, to drop you below that 30 hours. And my take is maintain the flexibility. And it's important to remember this development code hints at this more for the bonus density. So it matters at a definitional level, but it matters for new development. And any new developments could take different flavors about their intent and purpose. And so I'm not entirely sure how administratively the town added the 30-hour requirement in, but every developer agreed to it and signed a restricted agreement to that effect. So in theory, we could still add something to a specific development in the future, but I don't think the development code is the right place for that. Thank you. Yep. 2 more comments before I forget them. I'm glad Manager Speedley made this comment. The study session on whatever date in July, neither Peter or I will be able to attend that, but as Carly mentioned, we have been working closely on sort of what that structure could look like, what to sort of propose, what makes sense, what may not. So I think town staff is well prepared. And I did my best, I think, from my meeting notes to match or roughly match that tiered structure in here. I think I did. So they should align. And then for this board, as Eric mentioned, my request, because I just presented this to you today, and this is a lot, is to please read through these, provide any comments to me, questions. My intent, and I'll double check with Steve, the timeline is okay, but I think we're okay, is I would want to have this again as an action item on June 9th, since that's not that far away. And as you can see at the back of the letter, the intent is to have everyone sign it, so we can submit this packet to the town as our recommendations from not only staff, but this body as well. Yeah, sorry, I said 9th because there's a bunch of other things.
So that I was like, you want that on the town board agenda? I was like,
No,
oh,
sorry.
okay.
Thank you for that.
Anything else? Development of you error or
I'm gonna do this one a little bit different than I normally do, because the packet is about a little over twice as long, I think, of my most recent updates. But I wanted to add additional context for trustee Lancaster as he starts to integrate yourself into the board again. And I'm happy to meet with you individually as well if you have any questions. But just based on the conversation that we just had, I actually want to skip to the second to last page. At the bottom, the density comparison. So last week, or I guess 2 weeks ago at this point, part of the development code update and ongoing conversation regarding the density bonuses for workforce housing. I thought it would be a worthwhile exercise compared to maximum density limits for multifamily housing in similar jurisdictions to Estes Park. So I intentionally avoided using any town with major ski resorts, because that's not an ideal comparison. The results are below. So the high density of 8 units per acre is by far the lowest allowable maximum density compared to these nearby mountain resort towns in Colorado. These numbers are not cherry picked. I didn't find a single town that had a maximum allowable density lower than 8 units per acre. Happy to research any additional towns as well to see what we can find. Even Grand Lake, the smaller gateway to Rocky Mountain National Park, allows 20 units per acre in their high density residential district. Leadville and Salida are near 20 units an acre. And Netherlands allows a higher density than Estes, even at 11 units per acre, and that population is about 1,500. So these density numbers are base density, and they don't include increased density allowances that many jurisdictions have for workforce and attainable housing. That's going to be a next endeavor for me, and is a little bit more nuanced because the explanations in the code are less clear as some of these maximum density requirements are. So I thought that was very insightful to be able to see how low Estes Park is for a maximum density of 8 units per acre. And then coupled with the fact that in my research, I've only identified 2 vacant multifamily parcels that are larger than 3 acres. One of them is in the Stanley Historic District, so we can't develop that. The other one we actually own, had rezoned before 1125, but that's on a steep slope. That's the Castle Rock area, Castle Ridge one. It's in Castle Rock last. Castle Ridge. And so what that essentially means is that as long as 1125 is on the books, I don't really see land or practical way to access that bonus density that we had in the code. Because any land that would go to multifamily or RM would require the application of 1125, and without that, then we would likely be limited to accommodation zoning, which has the maximum 50 acre as well. Any questions on that, the density conversation?
I should just mention that's another recommendation in the depth code rewrite from us out that the bonus density gets applied to more zoning districts.
Also at the July 14th study session.
So back to the top here on page number 1. I'm not going to read this word for word as I normally do for the sake of time. So Fall River Village, we had our meeting with the planning commission yesterday that was ultimately voted to 3-0 to be able to proceed to town board with a recommendation to approve. There were 2 public comments that we received. One was about traffic, both internally and externally to the property. There was a request to ideally put some traffic calming measures into Farview Drive, which is public road. And so I think if we have more conversation with the neighbors there, if that's something that we want to see, if they want to see, then we can work to try to coordinate with the town to see if there's traffic calming measures that we can put in the public road, because we don't have control over that. Let's see. So, one advantage of this project is that it's not going to result in new construction, which I think is a big benefit. I also wanted to, really, I know there's been some public discourse, and so I thought the Estes Park Housing Authority Board made the right decision to reject the unsolicited offer to purchase the entire parcel of the upper parcel of Fall River Village. The broker opinion values that we received around that same time as the offer indicated that the offer was fall short of market value. If the EPHA board had selected to move forward with the below market offer in a non-competitive environment that went against the business plan that we presented to the public and town board, there should be significant scrutiny. So I think the right decision was made with that offer to allow us to progress and be good financial stewards of the 60. Town board planning commission meeting, I was in the attic of Fall River with some drywall contractors trying to examine how we can put the required fire blocking that's required as part of the subdivision. Any questions for Fall River? 775 Riverside, projects.
Sorry. Trying to interrupt. If any of you have extra time, I would recommend watching the planning commission meeting yesterday, specifically when it gets to the commissioners' questions and, public questions, commentary. It will help paint a picture of the general atmosphere. That's it.
Or 775 Riverside, project is currently in a holding pattern as other projects that we are working on take a priority from a funding standpoint. We currently have drawings completed to a design development level and have completed the first stage of the annexation process. But like I said, that's going to be on pause for the time being while Fish Hatchery and Tiny Town currently taking priorities over that. For 179 Stanley Circle Drive, I'm just going to touch on this at a high level. This was a town project that the town was owners of the parcel and asked the housing authority to develop on behalf of the town. After the denial at the rezoning, which was denied 6-0 by town trustees, EPHA provided written notice to the town manager that we were ceasing work on the project until further instruction from the property owners was provided. Based on the feedback from the neighbors, it doesn't seem like any rezone is going to be possible under the current environment. So the maximum density for that parcel would stand at 2 units per acre. I think that there's some questions that I have through this process of, the communication. And I haven't been in government long enough to know what was supposed to happen or where it might have gone wrong. But I thought it was interesting that a town parcel that was a priority or sure town parcel where the town staff was looking to develop it was in a situation where there was a 6-0 denial by the town trustees. So I'm not sure where in the process the communication lapsed, where it was clear that the project would not be able to go through. But I think it put us in a sticky situation and candidly had some reputational damage that we're still trying to work back from.
Pete, can I say something then?
Please.
Substantively, what we're saying is the direction from essentially our client indicated proceed. And that sense, and bring it in front of the regard forwards for approval. When it certainly during the process, after the process of the decision, became very clear that town board had given direction that was different than what was communicated to us. And so my regret from that is that it put reputational risk on the EPHA, and that has in front of the town board to essentially make their case for them when behind the scenes they knew that it was not a situation that they could approve. So in hindsight, I will approach those things a little bit differently because I allowed that to occur, and it put us in a position that was not happy.
Moving on to Fish Hatchery. So the development team is currently in the middle of addressing comments from Community Development, Public Works, Park Department, Museum District, Larimer County, Upper Thompson Sanitation District, the Estes Valley Fire Protection District, and the National Park Service. So this was comments from the second submittal that we provided for the subdivision of the Fish Hatchery development. We received feedback from planning department that they would like to have a development plan included in this submittal. And this next submittal, it's a little bit of a change of direction where after the first submittal, they had recommended that we don't submit a development plan. After this one, they want to have a development plan. So we're now adding that into the scope, which will take a little bit of time to prepare for that first submittal. We met with community development a couple times, discussed review of the comments, as well as with fire district, water, transportation, public works. The biggest question the project really faces is how to fund the public infrastructure. So these improvements fall outside of the construction of newly created lots. So the building and grading for the low-income housing tax credit component will require all of the permitted allocated basis, really not leaving those public funds or tax credits to build out the public infrastructure. Fortunately, intersections and pump stations are not revenue generating investments. So it creates a challenge from a financial perspective. We're currently exploring funding sources and limitations of the off-site requirements to help assist. Grant funding is limited, so bonds are working with the community impact financial institution like Impact Development Fund in Loveland for a loan is likely the best source of funding. I have a meeting with them next week to talk about that a little bit more. I've also met with a local banker earlier this week at A&B Bank to discuss that a little bit more. Had conversations with bond council as well, who was the group who helped secure the tax exempt bonds for Fallroot Village.
Just a comment here for trustee Lancaster. You're moving into budget hearings real quick here. I think this is a significant issue in terms of moving ahead fish hatchery. Perhaps this needs to be raised with the finance director, town administrator, this how can the town help to contribute to this particular development, either through certificate of information, reserve funds, scheduled funds for 2027 in terms of perhaps please dollars in reserves. This I anticipate will still be this discussion next time next year and moving ahead. Oh, yeah. How do that there is and there is sufficient funding to do this where we get
And I think we'll also pursue grants. However, the federal administration has drastically reduced a lot of the availability for public infrastructure, so it's just not a priority for them. Then in preparation, actually just one last comment with the funding. You know, what seems most likely to happen is that we will need to receive some type of loan, whether it's working with a governmental bond council to get a governmental tax exempt bond similar to Fall River Village, which we're able to do as a housing authority, or working with a CDFI like Impact Development Fund. The idea would be they would provide us the money up front to be able to do that infrastructure work against the pledge of future 6E funds to be able to pay off the debt and eventually the principal. But certainly committing future 6E funds towards that reduces the use of 6E funds in other areas like building housing. So it's always a trade-off there as we're doing that valuation. Lastly here, in preparation of the February 2027 low-income housing tax credit application, these applications are only once a year for the 9% tax credits. Scott and I are working on a scope of services for the design. In order to make our application as competitive as possible, we're looking at plans at roughly 70% completed, which aligns with the design development stage. Given the in-depth details and requirement for the development plan and part of the subdivision, the civil, landscaping, and architectural designs, we'll have roughly completed the schematic design. Also, as part of the design, we're striving to build this project a passive house certification. Questions or comments with fish hatchery? Great, moving on to Tiny Town. Our application for the Prop 123 land banking funds is due next Tuesday, May 26th by 11:59 p.m. I hope it's not need to have to use those evening hours. Hopefully we can get that in Friday or Monday this week. We are working on completing the last portions of the application. This is an extremely important application as a large portion of the funds. Large portion of the funds for this program are being cut for the foreseeable future due to the 1.5 billion budget deficit from the state. I'll have more information on that a little bit later. But information that we're providing in the application includes general land planning information, including the unit count, pro forma with construction and rent assumptions, letters of support, land appraisal, phase 1 environmental report, and a geotechnical report. CHAFA has communicated, CHAFA is the awarding body of these funds, that they have expect to have the awardees selected in July, and roughly 50% of the applicants will be awarded funds. I think we have a great site there that's flat, has existing infrastructure serving it that will keep the overall development costs in check. But there are some aspects that put us at disadvantages to other communities. Even though the program is labeled land banking, the priority for the state is for the projects to be constructed as soon as possible. Due to the housing authority prioritizing fish hatchery development at the moment, our projected timeline is behind other applicants. Additionally, the state likes to spread the funds out proportionally across the state. And with the success that we had in receiving $7 million in Prop 123 funds for Fall River Village, we're currently punching a bit above our weight class in terms of that analysis. So that being said, we're still hopeful that we'll be awarded these Prop 123 funds and be able to secure what I think might be the best available site in the Estes Valley for workforce housing. I mean, topography, the access to Maureen Ave right there, access to retail centers, the grocery store. There's a lot to like about it from an affordable housing standpoint. So last 2 pages here. So funding updates, reference this just above, but as part of the $1.5 billion budget sorted at the state level, many of the Prop 123 programs are being cut. So the program this year is being reduced by $130 million, and there's another $28 million in housing grants from the state that has also been slashed. So that includes about 75% of the Prop 123 money that provides for rental apartments. Because the project takes a year for planning, taking Prop 123 dollars out of the mix just won't hinder developments that are already in the works. I quoted this from an article from the Colorado Sun. This was the CFO for the Urban Lane Conservatory. He said, we're not just saying, hey, what are you going to fund this year? We're looking 2, 3, 5 years out. A funding source that's fundamental to the overall affordable housing and financial infrastructure just goes away, and it creates a ripple effect through the market and for years into the future. So really what this means is 2 of the most recent funding avenues that the Housing Authority has received funds for, and a third that we're currently pursuing, the Prop 123 land banking program, are being cut. So this is likely the last round of the Prop 123 land banking application for the next couple of years. The town received $2 million of county funds for fish hatchery. That was from ARPA funds that the county had received. That's a one-time influx from the county, so those funds aren't expected to refill itself. We had that $7 million in Prop 123 equity for Fall River Village, and we're now applying for $3 million in Prop 123 land banking for Tiny Town. So, as we look out to next year and the year after that, those funding sources likely aren't going to exist. So that creates difficulty in trying to provide below market affordable housing in an area where construction costs are higher than what you see in other areas on the front page. Just one more comment here in the miscellaneous section. We received proposals from 3 companies to provide capital needs assessment for 5 of our properties. 2 of the reports are up to the chapter requirements for re-syndication of LIHTC properties. These property inspections wrote here that they're completed in June, but we got a message that they might be able to start the inspections later this month. So we will get those started. And then lastly, I just wanted to comment on watching the town board study session for the goals moving forward. Providing housing for seasonal workers was discussed recently at this town board strategic planning session. I've looked to try to be proactive in this area, as I've not heard or seen instances of housing authorities providing housing for J1 visas. We're part of a high county group from Housing Colorado that meets monthly. And Carly also reached out to cast members. So I've asked them about that. So far, the only examples that I've been able to find for is housing for workers on the western slope in agricultural towns like Trinidad. There are funding sources for housing H2A workers, which are agricultural workers, but I've yet to identify any federal or state tools or grants for J1 or other types of seasonal housing. So that just means we might be paving the way for the housing authority involvement in this area due to the lack of funding sources for this type of housing. And if it is truly seasonal housing with only a 50% occupancy rate, then a strong partnership between the business community and the housing authority is likely required. I doubt that new construction would be feasible, but perhaps an adaptive reuse of an existing lodging facility or something similar could work.
So
Yeah.
it's an opportunity to also just remind the board and everyone in the room that we're providing, Jessica, I think it's a better count, but a minimum of 7 units at Fall River Village for seasonal workers this year. So that's up to 20 of those. That's okay.
Yeah.
10 is the current count. So that's 20 veterans. and 6 officers. So we are filling that need to some degree, but following that. Just important.
And it's been my experience that those who will be parsed through with some of the J one. It's occupied.
It's a pretty low bar to be.
Pretty low margin. Which some of our resources for those.
I just want to comment on the Stanley Circle. I just want to make clear, the board was very supportive of the project. It had to do with the dollar tree. It said that they're not supposed to be zoned without, without the owners within 5 years. There was a question about when it came in, but the intent of the voters was pretty clear in that. I at the meeting supported the project and it still is a good project. Applies with the district.
Thank you. Appreciate the report. Materials of your activity. Okay. Jeff? Yeah. Still have to go. Did I miss something?
So, yeah, quick updates. The only update on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed that.
It's okay. The only update on Cleve is, Boomsadoodle. Wow, I don't know why that's so long. Pull that out. Boomsadoodle is planning on a series of public outreach meetings. I think at the moment they're planning on 4 of them. Two meetings on 2 different days. Sorry, 2 different dates. In July, June and July. Now we are. More information to come. They're planning public outreach, 2 different dates, 2 meetings each day at the moment. I cannot be at the first one. People go as my replacement for that. So it's, I think, an opportunity to talk with the community, get feedback about what the concept is. That we haven't made substantive progress on what the legal or financing structure could be, and the financing structure will largely to some degree dictate. But it is being worked on, but nothing substantive to report. To give an update on CNAs, land acquisition opportunities. We will skip that for this conversation, and I'll probably bring more information to the board and G.
Just as a comment, I, for one, am skeptical about the Cleve Street development. I'm not sure what they're going to build, how they're going to do it. Current plans, from my understanding, is that our units will be part of the parking garage. Rode well, I think, for the tenants, and certainly not something that's beneficial for us. Particularly if we have space for the building will be looking for further discussion, I'm sure. Folks, the art folks along the street. Anyway, that's really it. And land acquisition is, let me skip that. And now, Jessica, did you?
Okay. I will go first. So pretty basic overview. I like to do quarterly reports on the workforce verifications, and these are the non-EPHA verifications that we do on behalf of the town and the deed restrictions that they have in place with the developers. This last month and a half to 2 months has been very heavily involved in that compliance monitoring, including some non-compliance letters that have gone to those residents. And so I wanted to wait a little bit before I provide that quarterly report. So I'll have that for the June board meeting. And, you know, unfortunately, those non-compliance letters, we give the residents opportunities to complete the paperwork a number of times. Typically, I send out 3 notifications and then officially post non-compliance letters. And so I'm in that process right now for 2 of the properties, and we'll have a better understanding of where we are on compliance in June. And then as far as there, not really any updates, no applications for down payment assistance or Town of Estes Park housing program. The rental assistance program, summertime last year was a very heavy time in applications. And so we're coming up on that lease renewal period for a number of recipients. And you know, we collect a lot of information, and I use that to try and forecast approvals and that attrition. And so I'm guessing that we'll probably have about a 10% roll off based on the current number of households that we serve. Just looking at what their rent to income ratio is simply. And it's been quite nice. The recipients of this program have done a wonderful job of letting me know if they're not renewing their lease and if they're moving on, or if they're moving down the valley, or if their housing situation has changed. And so that also helps me do a little forecasting for the program. But it's going well. More and more applicants. I would say, and this kind of flows into the maintenance portion that I included in this memo, late April and then the month of May have been extremely busy. Marla has done a wonderful job at Fall River in getting that leased up and just that progression. And so I do want to give Marla a shout out. I'm sure Jessica's probably going to do that as well. But that also flows over into our maintenance team and the amount of work that they have to do. And so with just with all of that, we've been very busy in this realm. And so I do want to highlight Joe and David on the maintenance team for all the work they did on unit turns. We had one Friday where we had 6 move-ins at Fall River Village, and they stepped up to make sure those units were prepped and ready for those new residents. And so I just want to thank the maintenance team. And we are in the process. We're getting ready to post new positions, one full-time replacement position, and then another, I don't want to officially call it a part-time. It will be less than 40 hours a week, but it will be year-round and benefited. And so with our growth, we have that opportunity to replace one full-time position that's vacant right now, and then we'll move forward and serve our residents in a different way. And then just on Vista Ridge, I am in communication with a realtor who a current Vista Ridge affordable owner is looking to list their property. And so I've been in discussion, making sure that the real estate agent has all the information they need in order to post, but haven't heard back in about a week. And so just waiting on that. And then last thing, Prospector. Prospector has reached 90.43% occupancy. And so I mentioned last month that they've been very busy and finally had a little bit of a lull to where we could look at numbers together. And that includes lease renewals and new lease ups for them. So it's good to see that they're at the point where they're at.
Again, our role with Prospector is administrative, it's rightly owned property. Yeah, service or work. It's our role. Anything else? Yeah. Anything for Jess, from Jess?
I've got some highlights on Fall River Village, like Jeff just mentioned. It was a very heavy month in May. We had Marla and Susan. Susan was still here on May 1, so she helped with the move-ins in April, and then on May 1 as well. We have completed 12 move-ins in the month of May so far, with 2 more scheduled before the end of the month, bringing a total of 14 move-ins to Fall River Village. I kind of added on to that last bullet point on Fall River Village of kind of who's moving in. We've got multiple business owners going into Fall River Village, preschool teachers, YMCA staff, waitresses, waiters from local restaurants, town staff, CDOT drivers, Estes Park Health employees, Estes Valley Rec District employees, school district employees, J1s, like we've been talking about, kind of seasonal housing. I gave a report or a report to things about how many seasonal units we have rented so far, and that's 10. And that breakdown is we've got a massage therapist that came in from Florida. We have a golf course tenant that he comes in this is his second year at Fall River Village, specifically from Florida. We've master leased with 8 employees now across all of our properties, 6 of those being at Fall River Village Lower specific, and then we have 2 master leases at Grand Estates. So that's just talking about that relationship with the employers and strengthening that for them. It's good to see that uptick. And we've got 2 J1 units are moving in June, 1st of June, and that's going to be 8 per unit. So that's 24 J1s that we'll be serving. And then McDonald's, we've got Safe Built. We've got a master lease with Safe Built. I'm not sure if that's contracted through the town, that employee. So yeah, it's a whole mix over there, and it's busy.
I have a question about the master leases. Assuming that the older lease is then charging individual tenants a fee for occupying the units. I'm curious to know what the fee is. In some cases, have people paying an exorbitant bed, community bathroom. So I want to make sure that if we're doing master leases, that the tenants that are occupying them are receiving fair use rather than charge. Curious.
Yeah. I did reach out to state on the CRR, that's the Colorado Renters Reward, that over Fall River Village, and just to kind of get an idea of how much has been distributed to our current residents down there. If they sign up, go onto the state app, then they receive 2% cash back if they pay their rent on time each month. And so far to those residents down below, they have distributed $2,812 to residents down there. And then I wrote back and said, well, we got another 14 coming your way because we moved in 14. So I think that number will jump significantly next month of getting people signed up. And I think that's really all main. I wanted to, we recognized Mary Ann at the beginning of the meeting, so I'll do it again at the end. She'll be leaving us in 2 weeks. The last day is the 29th after 22 years of the housing industry. And so I just want to say thank you personally for the impact that you've had for this organization and our tenants. I couldn't have done it 1 minute here without you. So thank you. Yeah.
Any questions for Jeff? Okay, old business. Scott.
I did just want to give an update. Jeff mentioned that with us growing, it has been a very, very busy month. And so we have been conducting interviews for a new property manager with Mary Ann stepping out and Susan giving her resignation, that gave an opportunity for a full-time property manager position. And so we did interviews. We received over 25 applications for that position, which was a lot. And then a week behind that, I also posted an office manager position, which was a newly created position, because as we grow, we can take some things off of Wendy's plate. And there's just more purchase orders coming in and everything. So we've conducted those interviews, and I made 2 job offers at the end of the day on Friday, and they both accepted with very great excitement and screaming and all the things they said. And so we will be onboarding 2 new members to the team starting June 1st. So that is,
Are we in fact looking for, one more property manager?
not at this time. We think that with shifting some responsibilities around with the leadership team, that we might do some restructuring with property managers' assignments per property. Because right now they're a little scattered for 2 properties, and so we might just locate, you take the east side of the properties, you take west side properties, you take central properties. So it's still in discussion of if we're going to, now is the time with 2 property managers having unassigned properties right now.
Where do we stand with, probably Scott or Joe question, where do we stand with the
Yeah, so as Jeff mentioned earlier, we will be posting in the next couple days. I've met 2 openings, less than 40-hour position for maintenance, and then a replacement maintenance technician as well. So we will be posting this position shortly. Couple reminders related to everything that we just talked about. Operational staff is paid for by the rents residents pay. Just a reminder, so we all understand how the money flows. The positions that we talked about, both the 2 new and the replacements, are not subsidized in any way. They're paid for by our operating company, so we're actually charged.
So they're not being paid?
That's correct.
Or grants or maybe outside.
That's correct.
Scott and I have had a discussion. Sort of just briefly and passionately about hiring an administrative deputy before someone else to help take up some of the administrative burden there. Scott's been with us now 7 years. We had
I came on board, I think we had 182.
yeah, well, we're now double that. 35. As indicated here late last night, and we're at a point significant work for the authority. And I just wanted to put this out there to the board, or think about this, that perhaps it's time to have take away something. Broader spread and something. Just my thought. Something you think. Anything else, on old business?
I postponed bringing the annual report back. I did receive some very good feedback from Eric regarding our report. It just wasn't on the card for me to dedicate any time to that this time. And I have scrapped the operating plan. We are nearly halfway through the year. At this point, we know what we have on our plate, which is a lot this year. I'll back up a little bit. It's, we had an operational meeting on Monday and we're trying to be very mindful to not add anything to our plates because we have a lot. We'll be hiring 4 people in the span of 45 days, which is far more than anything we've ever done. Previous to that, the most we've ever hired at one time was 2 positions, and that was just kicking off in December of 2020. And I mean, so we've done that twice. Along with everything else we have going on with the system conversion, an office move that, while it's been postponed, still has to happen. Because of the postponement, I don't have anywhere to put our new admin that we've accepted a job, so I will be temporarily relocating to open up my office space.
You're gonna work out of the safe.
Yeah, no. If nobody went to now, then I would do the same thing.
Yeah.
That's okay.
There's the opportunity to lock the door.
So with all of that, there just wasn't, I don't have the capacity to do what I want to do. Just an operational approach that kind of looks at what we're trying to achieve for the next year in operation. Hopefully in for 27, I'll have the capacity to do that or as a position as well. Office move, I briefly mentioned it. Unfortunately, because of the conversations at a town board level, I was put in the position, even though I literally had a check in hand to drop a deposit on the requisite furniture, based on town administrators' comments. I paid to look like a bad guy if I decided to proceed on what this board has already approved, so I did not do that. So we are ready to make moves after the June 9th meeting. In the meantime, it created some operational complications for us because we simply don't have the physical space for the board. So that's on pause for the moment, but I am prepared on the June 10th after our board meeting to set things in motion. We schedule shortly.
We mentioned my memo. At the time,
Yeah, so my apologies for what Eric just brought up was preparatory meetings for our joint study session, which I'm looking forward to. I hope you all are as well. I fully intended to send out dates for that with a draft slide deck, but I have not produced any. I've produced an outline of that slide deck, but not enough. And I let that slow down me sending the scheduled email. So I did send that out, I think, yesterday to you all. I did receive a couple responses with some dates. If none of those work and you were interested in attending a preparatory session, just let me know, and we still have some flexibility with dates and times. But take a look at that email. It's meant to be about an hour long, only a max of 2, and it'll just be a discussion on kind of topics that we anticipate being covered during that joint study session. And just so we all can kind of be prepared for that conversation to happen on June 9th. And as soon as we get a confirmed time on that, I will let you all know as well. The chances are it'll start somewhere around 4:30 or 5:00. And then, sorry, one more, sorry, because I missed this and this was my bad. I'll turn it over.
No, I just didn't know where you wanted me to squeeze in, so I let it.
This is where.
Okay. I passed out the 2025 impact report for use of 6E funds this past year. It was presented to the trustees on May 12th. So I have a copy of the slides for your review, as well as the draft of the final draft of the impact report. I guess just overall highlights, nearly $6 million in 6E revenue last year. So that's increased about 6% on an annual basis. So regardless of, what's kind of going on with tourism across the state, the lodging in the Estes Valley has remained really stable, which is good for all of our long-term initiatives. The impact report goes through each priority area. The priority areas for both housing and childcare were established when the ballot initiative was approved back in 2022. So we still operate kind of under that framework. And the impact report really talks about how we distributed funds and how we're moving the needle on those various priority areas. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to either me or Scott directly. And then we turn around and start planning for 2027. So we'll have some opportunities we typically do an online survey for the annual funding plan, as well as probably one public outreach meeting. So we'll get those meetings on the calendar in July.
And through your impact slide. Anything else? One question. Where do we stand with 25 and our return?
So I did reach out to our attorney to sort of give him an update on the case that he recommended we wait for the Supreme Court decision on. There has not been a decision, so I'm glad you bring it up. So his recommendation was still to wait and hold, but of course, you all can decide to do something different. We can bring him back in June and have a conversation. He apologized profusely for he was working and just totally missed our executive session last time. So he will make sure that doesn't happen again. But if we want to talk to him more directly on the June 9th meeting, we can set that up. I will also mention, so we've done nothing. We're waiting on the Supreme Court decision, which should come down.
Yeah, I'd kind of like to know one. Because I've been asked to say, decision that should be rendered. Yeah, does he have some feel for when this decision might be made?
I'll ask that direct question.
Yeah.
I think I have, but I'll ask it again.
Yeah.
I think there's one more item of note that I will mention since we're on the topic. I recommended earlier that you watch planning commission meeting to get a general tenor for questions and ideas around color of the village. It is a unique position because it's already built. So any variances that we're requesting are largely a carryover. Not all of them, but some significant ones are a carryover of the original PUD when it was originally built. And that agrees with that. Because we're not changing physical structures except for fire block. With that, there was a shock to me yesterday that there appears to be some confusion around whether 1125 applies. We have proceeded down the path we have because we received direct communication from the town that 1125 does not apply to this application. For me, that was put into question. That's for a few reasons, because I probably would have recommended different action in a different time frame than what we had done. So I plan on updating our lawyer on that to get his opinion. But we'll have to wait and see. We believe we're going to be on town board agenda on the 9th for them to review the amended PUD. And it will be ultimately up to town board whether 1125 applies or not. If it does, we will be faced with a series of decisions that have to proceed.
I think that there, just as a comment here, I think there is serious ramifications. 1125 is instituted for that particular development. Because it will have financing arrangements that have been put in place, agreed to by the town. Stuff that is lenders, where we are required, able to sell off some of those as we have done others in the past. Should that change, it has a significant impact on what we can do. And they have serious impact on how we fulfill our financial obligations to our lenders who have made the financing possible for all All of these. So, Scott, I appreciate you for that. For you all look at the, that's significant impact that we put in place. Changing decisions that have already been made for the benefit of the community. That being said, remember the two phones back. Liberating. Same thing. Pete, anything else? Is Jim still there? Jim, you still there? Jim,
Oh, he just dropped.
Yeah.
oh.
He literally just dropped.
I'd like to.
Nope, thank you.
Mary Ann, thank you again for your service to this organization. Right, anything?
Nope, Jim is my right, the Rocky Seascapes. You notice he was wearing his Texas shirt.
Enjoy the game.
Yeah, thank you. 10-0. Yeah.
Last chance, nothing. Good. Okay. We're adjourned. Yeah, look at that.